The soap burned her hands raw, but Maura Morgan didn't stop scrubbing until she could see her reflection in the worn floorboards of the Silver Pine Inn. She was on her knees in the main hallway when the door swung open, letting in a gust of cold Idaho mountain air that made her shiver beneath her threadbare dress. And with it came a man who looked like he'd walked straight out of the wilderness itself. It was March of 1878 in Wallace, Idaho, and the mining town had seen its share of rough characters, but this man was different. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly filled the doorframe. His dark hair fell past his shoulders in waves that hadn't seen a barber's scissors in months, maybe longer. Muscles strained against the buckskin jacket he wore, and his hands looked strong enough to snap a rifle stock in half. But it was his eyes that caught Maura's attention as she looked up from her bucket of soapy water. They were a piercing blue, and they looked at her with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Recognition. Not of who she was, but of what she was. A person, not just a servant. Help you. Maura's Uncle Vernon appeared from the back room, wiping his hands on his apron. He owned the Silver Pine Inn, and he'd taken Maura in 2 years ago when her parents died of fever. Taken her in, she thought bitterly, and turned her into his unpaid maid. "Need a room," the man said. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, like he spent more time talking to mountains than people. "Hot meal if you've got one. Name's Fletcher Pierce. We've got both. $3 a week, meals included." Vernon's eyes gleamed with the love of money, the only thing Maura had ever seen him care about. "Girl, get up and fetch Mr. Pierce some stew." Maura scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over her bucket. Her knees ached from hours on the hard floor, and her back protested as she straightened. She was 21 years old but felt 40 most days. Fletcher Pierce's eyes followed her movement, and she saw something flicker across his face. Anger, maybe, but not directed at her. "She got a name?" Fletcher asked, his gaze still on Maura. "Maura, she's my niece. Orphaned, so I give her room and board." Vernon said it like he was some kind of saint, not mentioning that the room was a closet under the stairs and the board was whatever scraps remained after the paying customers ate. "I can introduce myself, Uncle Vernon," Maura said quietly, then immediately regretted it when she saw his face darken. She'd pay for that later, probably with extra chores and a lecture about gratitude. But Fletcher stepped forward, extending one of those massive hands toward her. "Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Maura." She stared at his hand for a moment, shocked. Nobody shook hands with the help. Nobody treated her like a lady. Her own hand, red and chapped from lye soap, looked tiny as she placed it in his. His grip was gentle despite the obvious strength in those fingers, and warm in a way that made something in her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Likewise, Mr. Pierce," she managed. "Just Fletcher." Vernon cleared his throat loudly. "The stew, Maura. Our guest is hungry." She pulled her hand back reluctantly and hurried to the kitchen, feeling Fletcher's eyes on her back the whole way. The kitchen was hot from the wood stove, and she ladled stew into a bowl with hands that trembled slightly. What was wrong with her? He was just another customer, just another drifter passing through Wallace on his way to somewhere else. Except he didn't feel like just another anything. When she brought the bowl out to the main room where Fletcher had settled at a table near the window, he looked up at her with a smile that transformed his rugged face into something almost gentle. "Thank you kindly. You need anything else? Bread, coffee? Coffee would be fine. But only if you'll sit and have a cup with me." Maura glanced nervously toward the back room where her uncle had disappeared. "I can't. I have work to do." "What work?" "Floor looks clean enough to eat off of. Cleaner than most fancy hotels I've seen, and I've seen a few. There's always more work." She meant to sound resigned but heard the bitterness creep into her voice anyway. Fletcher set down his spoon and looked at her directly. "How long you been scrubbing floors for your uncle?" "2 years, since my parents passed." She didn't know why she was telling him this. Maybe because he asked like he actually cared about the answer. "And he pays you," Maura laughed, a short, harsh sound. "He gives me a roof and food, says that's payment enough." "That's not payment, that's slavery dressed up pretty." Fletcher's voice had gone hard and Maura saw his jaw clench. "You deserve better than this." The words hit her like a physical thing. Nobody had ever said anything like that to her before. When her parents died, everyone in Wallace had nodded approvingly when Vernon took her in, saying how charitable he was, how lucky she was to have family. Nobody asked if she was happy or treated well. Nobody cared that she worked from before dawn until after midnight every day, that her hands bled from the harsh soap, that she slept in a space barely big enough to lie down in. "I should get your coffee," she whispered, afraid that if she stood there any longer she might start crying, and she never cried. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. For the next 3 days, Fletcher Pierce was a constant, unsettling presence at the Silver Pine Inn. He spent his mornings doing whatever business had brought him to Wallace, something involving the mines from what Maura overheard, but his afternoons and evenings were spent at the inn. And every chance he got, he talked to her, not at her the way most men did. He talked to her, asked her questions, listened to her answers like they mattered. He asked about her parents, and she told him about her father's blacksmith shop, about helping her mother in the garden, about the fever that took them both within a week of each other. He asked what she liked to do, and she had to think hard because she couldn't remember the last time she'd done anything just because she enjoyed it. "I used to raid," she said finally, on the 3rd evening as she wiped down the bar while Fletcher nursed a whiskey. "My mother taught me. We had books, not many, but a few good ones. I read them over and over." "What happened to them?" "Uncle Vernon sold them, said I didn't need books when I had work to do." Fletcher's hand tightened around his glass so hard she thought it might shatter. "He had no right." "He had every right. They were in his house." "Doesn't make it right, just makes it legal. 2 different things." Fletcher finished his whiskey in one swallow. "You ever think about leaving?" The question was so unexpected that Maura dropped her rag. "Leave? And go where? Do what? I have no money, no prospects. At least here I have a place to sleep." "You have a prison cell where you're working yourself to death for a man who treats you like property." Fletcher leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "You're smart, you're capable, you're strong. You could do anything if you had half a chance." "Strong." Maura laughed again, that same bitter sound. "Look at me. I'm skin and bones. I'm nobody." "You're wrong." Fletcher stood, and the movement brought him close to her, close enough that she could smell pine needles and wood smoke on his clothes. "You want to know what I see?" "I see a woman who gets up every morning and faces another day of thankless work without complaint. I see someone who's been beaten down by life, but hasn't broken. I see strength in every line of you, Maura Morgan, and it makes me angry as hell that nobody's ever told you that before." Maura couldn't breathe. She stood frozen, staring up at this mountain of a man who was looking at her like she was something precious, something valuable. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "Want from you?" Fletcher shook his head slowly. "Nothing. I don't want anything from you, but I want things for you. I want you to have a life where your hands aren't raw from scrubbing. I want you to have books and time to read them. I want you to remember what it feels like to smile for real, not just that polite thing you do for customers. And most of all, I want you to believe that you deserve all of that." "Maura," Vernon's voice cracked through the room like a whip. "Stop bothering the guests and get to the kitchen. Those dishes won't wash themselves." Fletcher turned, and even Vernon, who feared nothing when it came to squeezing work out of his niece, took a step back at whatever he saw in the mountain man's face. "She's not bothering me. We were having a conversation. She's paid to work, not chat." "She's not paid at all, from what I understand." Vernon's face turned red. "That's family business and none of yours. Maura kitchen. Now." Maura moved to obey because she always obeyed, but Fletcher's hand on her arm stopped her. His touch was gentle but firm. "Wait. Mr. Pierce, I'll thank you not to interfere with my household." "Your household? That how you see her?" "Because the law sees her as a grown woman who can make her own choices. She's not your property, Vernon. I gave her a home when nobody else would. She owes me." "You gave her 4 walls and table scraps in exchange for 16-hour workdays. That's not charity. That's exploitation." Fletcher's voice was calm, but Maura could feel the anger rolling off him like heat from a forge. "And it ends now." "What are you talking about?" Fletcher pulled a leather pouch from his jacket and dropped it on the bar. It landed with the heavy clink of coins. "That's $200. More than enough to compensate you for 2 years of room and board. Maura's coming with me." The room spun. Maura grabbed the bar to steady herself. "What? You can't be serious," Vernon sputtered, but his eyes were on the pouch, calculating, dead serious. Fletcher looked down at Maura, his expression softening. "If you want to come, that is, I'm not your uncle. I won't force you to do anything, but I meant what I said. You deserve better than this, and I aim to prove it to you." "I don't understand. Come with you where?" "I've got a cabin about 20 miles from here, up in the mountains. Built it myself 5 years ago. It's solid, warm, plenty of room. There's a town nearby, Silver Summit, smaller than Wallace but decent enough. I was planning to hire help for the spring and summer anyway, someone to help with the cooking and such while I work my claim. You could do that, but I'd pay you real wages. Room, board, and $10 a month to start. You could save up, figure out what you want to do with your life, or stay on permanently if you like it. Up to you." $10 a month. Maura's mind reeled. She'd never had $10 at once in her entire life. And a job where she'd be paid, treated like a real employee, not just a burden to be worked until she dropped. "She's not going anywhere with you," Vernon said, but his hand was already reaching for the coin pouch. "What would people think?" "I don't give a damn what people think," Fletcher said bluntly. "But if you're worried about her reputation, we can stop by the preacher in Silver Summit and make it legal. I'm proposing employment, Vernon, not anything improper." "You're proposing kidnapping." "I'm proposing giving your niece a choice." Fletcher turned his back on Vernon, which was either very brave or very stupid, and faced Maura completely. "What do you say? Will you come work for me?" Maura's thoughts raced. This was insane. She didn't know this man. He could be a murderer, a thief, a liar. He could be taking her to his cabin to do God knew what. Every practical instinct screamed at her to say no, to stay in Wallace where at least she knew what each day would bring. But then she looked at her hands, red and cracked and aching. She thought about the closet under the stairs where she slept on a straw mattress, so thin she could feel the floor boards through it. She thought about Vernon's constant criticism, his demands, the way he treated her like she was less than human. She thought about the rest of her life stretching ahead, empty of anything but work and exhaustion, and she looked into Fletcher Pierce's blue eyes and saw something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. "I'll come," she heard herself say. "I'll work for you." Fletcher's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have warmed the whole valley. "You won't regret this." Vernon sputtered and protested, but he took the money, and that told Maura everything she needed to know about how much he really valued her. Within an hour, she'd packed her few belongings into a small bundle. She had 2 dresses besides the one she wore, a coat that had belonged to her mother, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, and a locket with her parents' pictures inside. It all fit into a cloth bag small enough to carry in one hand. Fletcher had a horse, a big, sturdy gelding named Bear, and a mule loaded with supplies. He lifted Maura onto Bear's back like she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. She'd never been this close to a man before, never felt the solid warmth of a man's chest against her back or the strength of his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. "You comfortable?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," she managed, though comfortable wasn't exactly the word for what she was feeling. Terrified, exhilarated, confused, hopeful, all of those and more, they rode out of Wallace as the sun was setting, painting the Idaho mountains in shades of gold and purple. Maura didn't look back. The ride to Fletcher's cabin took most of the next day. They stopped for the night at a way station where Fletcher paid for 2 rooms without her having to ask, which eased some of her worries about his intentions. He was a perfect gentleman, making sure she had a hot meal and a comfortable bed before retiring to his own room. In the morning, they continued into the mountains, following trails that Maura would never have seen on her own. Fletcher pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the land, explained which plants were useful and which were dangerous. He talked easily, filling the silence with his deep voice, and slowly, Maura began to relax against him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked as they climbed higher into the pines. "Really? You didn't have to spend $200 on a stranger. You're not a stranger, not anymore." Fletcher was quiet for a moment and Maura felt him shift behind her. "You want the truth? My ma was in a situation like yours once. My pa found her working at a boarding house in Montana, being treated worse than livestock. He gave her a way out, married her proper, took care of her. They had 30 good years together before he passed. She died 2 years later, said there was no point living without him. I watched them, saw what real partnership looks like when 2 people choose each other and treat each other with respect. When I saw you on your knees in that hallway, looking so tired you could barely lift your head, I thought of my ma. And I thought, maybe I could do for you what my pa did for her. Give you a chance." Maura's throat tightened. "Your father sounds like he was a good man. The best. He taught me that strength isn't about how much you can lift or how hard you can hit. It's about what you do with your strength, who you protect with it. He used his to build a life for my ma. I'd like to think I learned something from his example." They reached the cabin in the late afternoon. Maura had been expecting something rough and primitive, but what she saw took her breath away. The cabin was large, built from solid logs with a stone chimney that rose high into the air. It sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a view of the mountains that seemed to stretch forever. A small barn stood nearby, along with what looked like a chicken coop and a garden plot ready for spring planting. "You built this yourself?" she asked in wonder. "Most of it." "Had some help with the barn. Come on, I'll show you inside." The interior was just as impressive as the exterior. It was one large room but cleverly divided. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking area nearby. There was a real table with chairs, a comfortable-looking armchair, shelves full of books that made Maura's heart leap, and in the back corner, separated by a hanging quilt, she could see a bed frame. "That's my room back there," Fletcher said, following her gaze. "But I'll move my things." "You should have the bedroom. I can sleep out here by the fire." "I can't take your bed. This is your home. It's your home now, too, at least for as long as you want it to be." Fletcher set her bundle down gently on the table. "I know this is all strange and probably scary. But I want you to understand something, Maura. You're not my servant here. You're not my property. You're my employee, and more than that, I hope you'll be my friend. This arrangement works both ways. You cook and keep the place tidy, help me with the garden and the animals. I provide room and board, pay your wages, and treat you with respect. If you're ever unhappy, if you ever want to leave, you just say the word. I'll take you to Silver Summit, give you your wages, and help you get settled wherever you want to go. Is that clear? Maura nodded, not trusting her voice. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this, like her feelings and choices mattered, like she was a real person with rights and options. Good. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm hungry enough to eat a bear. How about we see what we can put together for supper, and then I'll show you around the property properly tomorrow. That first evening set the pattern for the days that followed. They worked together preparing the meal, and Fletcher talked constantly, telling her where everything was, explaining his routines, asking her opinions on things. They ate together at the table, and afterward, Fletcher built up the fire while Maura washed the dishes, insisting that he dry them since she'd done the cooking. When the dishes were done, Fletcher pulled down one of the books from his shelf. You mentioned you used to like reading. Would you read to me? My eyes get tired at night, but I do enjoy a good story. So Maura read while Fletcher worked on repairing a saddle, and the sound of her own voice reading words from a real book made her want to cry with happiness. She'd forgotten how much she loved stories, how they could transport you somewhere else, make you forget your troubles for a little while. The days turned into weeks, and spring crept into the Idaho mountains with wildflowers and warming air. Maura threw herself into her work, but it was different from the drudgery at the inn. Here, she worked beside Fletcher as a partner. They planted the garden together, Fletcher's strong back turning the soil while Maura followed behind with seeds. They tended the chickens together, fixed a broken board on the barn together, even went fishing in the nearby stream together, and they talked. Lord, how they talked! Fletcher told her about his childhood in Montana, about learning to trap and hunt from his father, about the year he spent in San Francisco and hated every minute of the crowded city. Maura told him about her parents, about the books her mother had loved, about her dreams of maybe teaching school someday if she ever got the chance. Why not? Fletcher said when she mentioned the teaching. There's a school in Silver Summit that's been looking for a teacher, old Mrs. Henderson taught there for 20 years, but she's getting too frail. They've been making do with whoever they can find. I'm not qualified. I've had no formal training. You read better than anyone I've ever met. You can write, do arithmetic. You know history and literature. That's more qualification than most frontier teachers have. If it's something you want, we could talk to the town council. We. He kept saying we like they were a team, like her dreams were his dreams too. It made Maura's heart do strange things in her chest, made her catch herself watching him when she should be focused on her work. She noticed things about him. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating. The quiet strength in his hands as they repaired a harness or carved a new spoon from a piece of wood. The genuine warmth in his smile when she said something that amused him. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her one morning as she watched him splitting wood, his muscles straining against his shirt, sweat glistening on his skin despite the cool morning air. She loved him, this rough, kind mountain man who'd saved her from a life of drudgery, who treated her like she mattered, who made her laugh and encouraged her dreams and looked at her sometimes like she was the sunrise and sunset all rolled into one. It terrified her. Because what if he didn't feel the same way? What if she was just his employee, his charity case, his good deed? What if he saw her as a sister, a friend, anything but a woman he could love? She couldn't bear to ruin this, to make things awkward between them. So she kept her feelings locked away and tried to content herself with the life she had, which was already better than anything she dared to dream. But keeping secrets from Fletcher proved harder than she expected. He noticed everything. He noticed when she grew quiet, when she rushed to finish the dishes so she could escape to her room. He noticed the way she sometimes caught herself staring at him and had to look away quickly. One evening in late May, after they'd finished supper and she'd read 3 chapters of a book about pirates and adventure, Fletcher set down the knife he'd been using to carve and looked at her seriously. "Maura, are you unhappy here?" The question caught her completely off guard. "What? No. Fletcher, I've never been happier in my life." "Then why do you seem sad lately? If something's wrong, if I've done something to upset you, I need you to tell me. This only works if we're honest with each other. You haven't done anything wrong. You've been nothing but kind to me." "Then what is it?" Maura set down the book with shaking hands. She couldn't tell him. But she couldn't lie to him either, not when he was looking at her with such genuine concern. "It's complicated." "Complicated how? I don't want to ruin things." "Ruin what things?" Fletcher stood and crossed to where she sat, crouching down so he was at eye level with her. "Maura, you could never ruin anything. Whatever it is, we can work it out. I promise." She looked into his blue eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there, nothing but honest concern for her well-being. And something inside her broke open. "I've developed feelings for you," she whispered. "Feelings that go beyond friendship. And I know that's not part of our arrangement. I know you brought me here to work, not to complicate your life with unwanted affection. But you asked me to be honest, so there it is. I love you, Fletcher Pierce. I've probably loved you since that first day when you told me I deserved better. And I understand if that makes you uncomfortable, if you want me to leave. I'll go without any hard feelings. You've given me so much already." She braced herself for rejection, for pity, for awkwardness. What she didn't expect was for Fletcher to start laughing. Not cruel laughter, but the kind that came from pure relief and joy. "Unwanted," he said, shaking his head. "Maura, I've been half out of my mind trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing. I didn't want to push you, didn't want you to feel pressured because you work for me and live in my house. I've been trying to be a gentleman, give you time to settle in, make sure you felt safe here. But Lord above, woman, I've loved you since you put your hand in mine at that inn and looked at me like maybe, just maybe, somebody finally saw you for who you really are. I thought I was bringing you here to work. But the truth is, I was bringing you here because I couldn't stand the thought of leaving you behind. Because even after knowing you for 3 days, I knew you were the most remarkable person I'd ever met, and I wanted the chance to know you better. To maybe, if I was lucky enough, make you fall in love with me too." Maura couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him in wonder. "You love me with everything I am." Fletcher reached up and cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. "You're strong and smart and beautiful, and you've got a spirit in you that wouldn't break no matter how hard your uncle tried. I look at you and see my future. See a partner, a companion, someone to build a life with, but only if that's what you want. I won't press you, won't rush you. We can take all the time you need." "I don't need time," Maura said, surprised by her own certainty. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Fletcher. I want to build that life with you." He kissed her then, gentle at first, like she was something precious that might break. But when she kissed him back, threading her fingers through his long hair, pulling him closer, the kiss deepened into something that made her toes curl in her boots. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not because it's practical or proper, but because I can't imagine spending the rest of my life with anyone else. Marry me and be my wife, my partner, my love. I'll spend every day for the rest of my life proving to you that you deserve everything good this world has to offer." "Yes," Maura laughed, crying at the same time, overwhelmed with emotion she couldn't name. "Yes, I'll marry you." They rode to Silver Summit the next morning, neither wanting to wait another day. The town was small, as Fletcher had said, just a main street with a handful of buildings, but it had a preacher, and that was all they needed. Preacher Morrison was happy to perform the ceremony, with his wife and Fletcher's friend Daniel serving as witnesses. Maura had never imagined her wedding would be like this, standing in a small church in a borrowed dress because she didn't own anything nice enough. But as she looked at Fletcher, resplendent in clean clothes with his hair tied back, his eyes shining with love and promise, she couldn't imagine anything more perfect. They spoke their vows with voices that shook with emotion, and when Fletcher kissed her as her husband for the first time, Maura felt like her heart might burst from happiness. "I don't have much to offer you," Fletcher said as they rode back to the cabin, Maura sitting in front of him on Bear, held securely in her husband's arms. "The cabin's not fancy. The work's hard. Winters can be brutal up in these mountains." "You've given me everything," Maura said, leaning back against his solid chest. "You've given me respect, freedom, love. You've given me myself back. That's worth more than all the fancy houses in the world." That first night as husband and wife was everything Maura had dreamed and nothing she'd expected. Fletcher was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. He took his time, exploring her body with reverent hands, kissing every inch of her skin like she was a treasure map he was memorizing. And when they finally came together, it was with whispered words of love and promises of forever. Afterward, wrapped in Fletcher's arms with the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls, Maura felt a peace she'd never known before. This was home. Not the cabin, though she loved it. Not Idaho, though the mountains were beautiful. Home was this man, this life they were building together. The summer passed in a blur of happiness. They worked side by side in the garden, watching their vegetables grow. Fletcher took Maura with him when he checked his trap lines, teaching her to read the signs of the forest. They spent evenings reading together, talking, making love. Fletcher was insatiable for her, and she found herself matching his passion, amazed at the pleasure they could give each other. In August, Fletcher took her back to Silver Summit to meet with the town council about the teaching position. Maura was nervous, certain they'd take one look at her and see the scrub girl from the inn. But Fletcher had coached her, helped her prepare, and he stood beside her as she answered their questions. His faith in her gave her confidence, and when the council offered her the position starting in September, she accepted with hands that only trembled a little. "I'm so proud of you," Fletcher said as they celebrated that night with a special supper. "My wife, the teacher. You're going to change those children's lives, give them the gift of learning, just like you changed my life." "You changed mine," Maura countered. "You saved me." "No." Fletcher took her hand, brought it to his lips. "You saved yourself. You were brave enough to take a chance, to leave everything you knew for something better. I just drove the wagon." By October, Maura had settled into teaching, riding to Silver Summit 3 days a week while Fletcher worked his claim and tended the homestead. The children loved her, responded to her patience and enthusiasm. She taught them reading and arithmetic, but also kindness and the belief that they could be anything they wanted to be, regardless of where they came from. She saw herself in some of them, particularly a quiet girl named Sarah whose parents worked her too hard and valued her too little. Maura made sure Sarah had books to borrow, made sure she knew that education was her path to a better life. Winter came hard that year, with snow piling up past the windows and temperatures that made the logs of the cabin creak. But inside, Maura was warm and safe. She and Fletcher spent long evenings by the fire, reading, talking, making love under piles of quilts. He told her stories of winters past, of being trapped in the cabin for weeks at a time, but it never felt claustrophobic to Maura. How could it, when she was with the man she loved? It was in January that Maura realized she was pregnant. She'd been feeling tired, queasy in the mornings, her body changing in subtle ways. When she told Fletcher, he whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around despite her protests that he'd make her dizzy. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "A family. Maura, we're going to be a family." "We already are a family," she pointed out, laughing at his excitement. "But yes, soon there will be 3 of us." Fletcher became impossibly more protective after that, insisting she not overdo things, making sure she ate enough, worrying over every little thing. Maura found it endearing even when it was annoying. He built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth as glass so no splinter could harm their baby. He bought soft yarn from the general store so Maura could knit blankets and small clothes. Spring came again, and with it, Maura's belly swelling with their child. She had to give up teaching for the season, which disappointed her, but the school board assured her the position would be waiting when she was ready to return. She spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny gowns, organizing the cabin, resting when Fletcher insisted. In late June, on a warm evening with the last rays of sunlight streaming through the windows, Maura's labor began. Fletcher rode for the midwife from Silver Summit, a competent woman named Mrs. Chen who delivered half the babies in the territory. She arrived in time to coach Maura through the hardest hours of her life, with Fletcher holding her hand and whispering encouragement. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her as she strained and pushed. "You can do this. Just a little more, my love. Our baby's almost here." And then there was a cry, strong and loud, and Mrs. Chen was saying, "It's a boy, a healthy boy." Maura collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. Fletcher was crying unashamedly as Mrs. Chen placed the baby in Maura's arms. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. "Hello, little one," Maura whispered. "Welcome to the world. What should we name him?" Fletcher asked, one finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "I was thinking, James, after my father." "James Pierce. James Pierce." Fletcher tested the name, smiled. "It's perfect, he's perfect, you're perfect. Lord, Maura, I don't know how I got so lucky." "We're both lucky," Maura said, looking from her husband to her son, her heart so full she thought it might overflow. "We found each other. We chose each other. That's not luck. That's love." The years that followed were the happiest of Maura's life. Little James grew from a baby to a toddler to a bright, curious boy who loved following his father around the homestead and listening to his mother read stories. Maura returned to teaching when James was 2, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse where he played quietly while she taught. The arrangement worked well, and James grew up surrounded by books and learning. 2 years after James came another baby, a daughter they named Lucy after Fletcher's mother. She had Maura's dark eyes and Fletcher's stubborn spirit, and from the moment she could walk, she was constantly getting into things, exploring, pushing boundaries. Fletcher adored her, this tiny girl who refused to be confined by anyone's expectations of what little girls should be. The cabin had to be expanded as their family grew. Fletcher added a second room for the children, built a larger porch, improved the barn. The homestead thrived under their combined efforts. Maura's garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, so they sold the surplus in Silver Summit. Fletcher's trapping and mining brought in steady income. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. The town of Wallace had faded into Maura's past, a dark memory that grew fainter with each passing year. She occasionally heard news from there through travelers who passed through Silver Summit. The Silver Pine Inn had changed hands after Vernon died, some said from drink, Some said from meanness that ate him up from the inside. Maura felt no satisfaction at his death, just a distant pity for a man who'd never learned to value anything beyond money. On their 10th anniversary, Fletcher took Maura back to the spot where they'd first arrived at the cabin, where she'd seen her future home for the first time. The view was just as breathtaking as it had been that first day, mountains stretching into the distance, pine trees standing sentinel all around. "You remember what I told you that day at the inn?" Fletcher asked, his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest just like he had when they rode together on Bear so many years ago. "You told me I deserved better," Maura said softly. "I was right, wasn't I? You deserved better than scrubbing floors for a man who didn't appreciate you, better than a life of servitude and loneliness. I wanted to prove to you that you were worth more than that. You did prove it." Maura turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his bearded face in her hands. His hair had silver threads in it now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the mountain sun. But he was still the most handsome man she'd ever seen, still strong and protective and full of love for his family. "You proved it every single day. Every time you treated me as an equal partner. Every time you supported my dreams. Every time you looked at me like I was the most important person in the world. You didn't just tell me I deserved better, Fletcher. You gave me better. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Fletcher said, his voice rough with emotion. "A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You know what the best part is? We're not done yet. We've got years ahead of us still, more adventures, watching our children grow, maybe grandchildren someday. Growing old together in this place we've built. I can't wait for all of it. Neither can I." They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains. Two people who'd found each other when they both needed saving, who'd built a life of love and respect and partnership from nothing but determination and faith in each other. James came running up the path then, 8 years old and full of energy, with 6-year-old Lucy trailing behind trying to keep up with her big brother. "Papa, Mama, come quick. Lucy found a rabbit nest in the garden. We'd better go see," Fletcher said, taking Maura's hand. They walked back to the cabin together, their children dancing ahead of them, and Maura thought about the girl she'd been 10 years ago, on her knees scrubbing floors with raw hands and a hopeless heart. That girl could never have imagined this life, this happiness. She'd thought she was nobody, worthless, destined for nothing but hard work and early death. She'd been so wrong. She was Maura Pierce, teacher, wife, mother, homesteader. She was loved and valued. She was strong. And she'd built this beautiful life not in spite of her difficult past, but because of it. Because she'd had the courage to take Fletcher's hand when he offered it. Because she'd believed him when he said she deserved better. Because she'd chosen hope over fear. The cabin came into view, smoke rising from the chimney into the twilight sky, warm light glowing in the windows. Home. Her home, earned and chosen and cherished. Fletcher squeezed her hand as they walked, and Maura squeezed back, a silent conversation of love and gratitude that needed no words. They'd made promises to each other 10 years ago in that little church in Silver Summit. To love, honor, cherish for better or worse in sickness and health until death parted them. But they'd also made an unspoken promise, one they renewed every single day, to see each other truly. To value each other completely. To build a life where both of them could thrive, and they had. Against all odds, against every expectation they had, the rabbit nest, it turned out, had 5 tiny babies in it, blind and helpless. James and Lucy were enchanted, wanting to touch them, but Fletcher gently explained that they needed to leave the nest undisturbed so the mother could care for her babies. "But we can watch them from a distance," he said. "See them grow. That's the best way to love wild things sometimes. Give them space to be what they're meant to be, but stay close enough to help if they need it. Maura met his eyes over the children's heads and saw the deeper meaning there. It was what Fletcher had done for her. Offered help without smothering her, given her space to become who she was meant to be, stayed close enough to catch her if she stumbled. And in return, she'd done the same for him, helping him transform from a lonely mountain man into a husband and father, giving him the family he'd always wanted but never thought he'd have. That night, after the children were asleep in their room and the cabin was quiet, Maura and Fletcher lay in bed together, comfortable in the darkness and each other's presence. You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into the silver pine in that day? Fletcher asked quietly. Sometimes, Maura admitted, but not for long. It makes me too sad to think about. I probably would have worked myself to death for Vernon, never knowing there was anything better out there. I think about it more than I should, Fletcher said. Think about how close I came to riding right past Wallace. I was heading for Montana originally, just stopped in Wallace for supplies. If the weather had been better, I might not have stayed for a room. Might have just bought what I needed and kept going. The thought that I might have missed you might have left you there. He trailed off, his arms tightening around her. But you didn't. You stayed. You saw me. Maura kissed his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. Some people would call that fate. What would you call it? Maura thought for a moment, considering. Grace, she said finally. Unearned, unexpected grace. We both needed saving in different ways. You needed a family, someone to share your life with. I needed freedom, someone to believe in me. And somehow, impossibly, we found exactly what we needed in each other. That's not just luck or fate, that's grace. Grace, Fletcher repeated thoughtfully. I like that, and I'm grateful for it every single day. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they'd found something rare and precious and worth fighting for. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. When James was 12, he fell from a tree and broke his arm, and Maura discovered she was just as strong in a crisis as Fletcher had always told her she was. She rode to Silver Summit for the doctor, stayed calm while the bone was set, nursed her son through the pain and healing. When Lucy was 10, she announced she wanted to be a trapper like her father, and Fletcher taught her the trade without question, proud of his daughter's independent spirit. When the school in Silver Summit needed a new building, Maura led the fundraising effort, drawing on skills she'd developed over years of teaching and community involvement. She was no longer the timid girl who'd scrubbed floors. She was a force to be reckoned with, and Fletcher's eyes shone with pride every time he watched her stand up and speak her mind. They faced hardships too, because life always brought hardships. There was the winter when Fletcher got sick with pneumonia, and Maura sat by his bedside for 3 days straight, forcing medicine down his throat and praying harder than she'd ever prayed. He pulled through, but the scare reminded them both that life was fragile, that every day together was a gift. There was the year the garden failed and money was tight, and they had to rely on the community they'd built for help, learning to receive grace as well as give it. There was the heartbreak when Maura miscarried a 3rd child, and Fletcher held her while she cried, grieving with her for the baby that would never be. But through it all, their love remained constant. If anything, it deepened with time, growing roots that went down to bedrock. They knew each other completely now, all the strengths and weaknesses, all the quirks and habits. Fletcher knew that Maura got quiet when she was worried and needed gentle coaxing to talk about what was bothering her. Maura knew that Fletcher pushed himself too hard when he was anxious and needed reminding to rest. They'd learned to work together as a true team, anticipating each other's needs, supporting each other's dreams, facing every challenge united. When James turned 18, he announced he wanted to go to the territorial capital for schooling, wanted to study law. It was both proud and painful for Maura and Fletcher to see their son ready to leave home, to make his own way in the world. But they'd raised him to be independent, to chase his dreams, so they scraped together the money for his education and sent him off with their blessing. "We did good," Fletcher said the night after James left, the cabin feeling too quiet without his presence. "We did," Maura agreed. "He's smart and kind and confident, everything we hoped he'd be." "He gets the smart from you," Fletcher teased, "and the kind from you." Maura leaned against her husband, grateful that even after nearly 20 years of marriage, his solid presence still comforted her. "And the confidence from both of us, because we taught him he was worth something." Lucy stayed home for 2 more years, working the trap lines with Fletcher and making a name for herself as one of the best hunters in the territory. Men sometimes made the mistake of underestimating her because she was a woman, but she proved them wrong every time. When she was 19, she met a young prospector named Thomas at the Silver Summit trading post. He was respectful and hardworking, and most importantly, he saw Lucy for who she was and loved her without trying to change her. Maura recognized the look in his eyes when he watched Lucy. It was the same look Fletcher still gave her. Lucy and Thomas married in the spring of 1898, 20 years after Fletcher had walked into the Silver Pine Inn and changed Maura's life forever. The wedding was held at the cabin, with half of Silver Summit in attendance. James came home from his studies to stand up for his sister. Preacher Morrison, now ancient and shaky but still performing ceremonies, repeated the same words he'd spoken for Maura and Fletcher 2 decades earlier. "You promise to love, honor, and cherish." Maura clutched Fletcher's hand as they watched their daughter marry. "We're getting old," she whispered. "Speak for yourself," Fletcher whispered back, but his hair was more silver than dark now, and his hands showed the evidence of decades of hard work. Maura knew her own face showed the years too, lines earned from smiling and squinting into the sun and living a full life. "I wouldn't change a single day of it," Maura said. "Neither would I." After Lucy married and moved to her own homestead a few miles away with Thomas, the cabin felt empty in a way it never had before. Maura and Fletcher were alone again, just as they'd been in the beginning. But it was a different kind of alone now. They'd built a life together, raised children, contributed to their community. They'd proved that 2 people from difficult pasts could create something beautiful if they were willing to work for it. Maura still taught at the Silver Summit School, though only 3 days a week now instead of 5. Fletcher still worked his trap lines, though not as extensively as before. Mostly, they enjoyed each other's company, taking long walks through the mountains they'd called home for so long, reading together by the fire, visiting with their children and the grandchildren that started arriving as the new century began. James sent letters from the capital, telling them about his law practice and the young woman he was courting. Lucy came by weekly with her growing family, eventually 3 children who ran wild through the cabin, just as Lucy and James once had. Maura and Fletcher spoiled them shamelessly, as was a grandparent's right. On a warm summer evening in 1903, 25 years after that fateful day at the Silver Pine Inn, Maura and Fletcher sat on their porch watching the sunset. Fletcher was whittling a toy horse for Lucy's youngest, and Maura was mending a shirt, comfortable chores that left room for conversation. "I've been thinking," Fletcher said without looking up from his work. "Should I be worried?" Maura teased. "Probably. I've been thinking about going back to Wallace, just once. I want to see the place where I found you." Maura set down her mending, surprised. "Why?" I don't know exactly. Maybe to remind myself how far we've come. Maybe to remember that girl who was so scared but took a chance anyway. Maybe just to say thank you to whatever force brought me to that inn on that particular day. He looked at her then, his blue eyes still as clear as they'd been at 28. Will you come with me? To Wallace. Fletcher, I have no desire to see that place again. I know, but humor me. One last trip together. Not to mourn the past, but to celebrate how we changed it. How you changed it by being brave enough to choose yourself. When he put it like that, how could she refuse? They made the journey to Wallace in early September, riding side by side on horses where once Maura had ridden in front of Fletcher on Bear, who had long since died peacefully in his sleep at the ripe old age of 32. The trip took 2 days, and they spent the night at that same way station where Fletcher had gotten them separate rooms all those years ago. We don't need separate rooms this time, Maura said as they checked in, and Fletcher laughed. No, I suppose we don't, Mrs. Pierce. Wallace had changed in 25 years. It was larger, more prosperous, with new buildings and more people. The Silver Pine Inn was still there, but it had a different name now and looked better maintained than it had under Vernon's ownership. Maura felt a strange disconnect looking at it, like it was a place from someone else's life, not hers. That's where I was standing when I first saw you, Fletcher said, pointing to a spot near the door. I remember thinking the place looked rough. Then the door opened and I saw you on your knees in the hallway, and all I could think was that someone should help you up. You did more than help me up. You helped me stand on my own 2 feet. They walked past the inn, through the town, Maura pointing out the blacksmith shop where her father had worked, now run by someone else. The house where she'd grown up had been torn down, replaced by a newer building. It should have made her sad, but it didn't. That life was so far behind her now that it felt like ancient history. You know what I realized, Maura said as they walked. I'm not that person anymore. The girl who lived here, who was so beaten down by life she couldn't imagine anything better. She's gone. You helped me become someone new. Someone strong and capable and happy. And I'm grateful to her, that frightened girl, because she was brave enough to take your hand when you offered it, but I'm not her anymore. No, Fletcher agreed. You're not. You're so much more, and I've been honored to watch you become who you are. They spent only one night in Wallace, staying at a different inn, a nicer one. In the morning, they began the journey home, and Maura felt lighter somehow, like she'd finally let go of the last bit of that old life that had been clinging to her without her even realizing it. The ride back to Silver Summit and their cabin took them through some of the most beautiful country in Idaho, and they took their time, stopping to enjoy the views, talking about everything and nothing. At one point, they stopped by a stream to let the horses drink, and Fletcher pulled Maura close. I love you, he said simply. I've loved you for 25 years, and I'll love you for 25 more if we're lucky enough to get them. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Maura Pierce. The best decision I ever made was walking into that inn. The second best was asking you to leave with me. And the third best was every single day I've chosen to wake up beside you and build this life together. Maura kissed him, not caring that they were in the middle of nowhere with only the horses and the mountains as witnesses. I love you too. More than words can say. You told me I deserved better, and then you spent 25 years proving it, not just with words but with actions. Every single day you've shown me that I'm valued, that I matter, that I'm loved. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. How could I not love you? They made it home by evening, and the cabin looked just as it always had, solid and welcoming with smoke rising from the chimney, because Lucy had come by to check on things and had built up the fire for their return. Inside, they found a pot of stew waiting and a note from their daughter saying she hoped they'd enjoyed their trip. Good kids we raised, Fletcher said, reading the note. "The best," Maura agreed. They settled back into their routines, the comfortable patterns of a long marriage. But something had shifted during that trip to Wallace. Maura felt more at peace than ever before, like she'd finally closed the last door on her past and could focus completely on her present and future. The years continued their steady march. James became a prominent lawyer in the territorial capital and married his sweetheart, giving Maura and Fletcher 3 more grandchildren they saw less often but loved just as much. Lucy and Thomas's homestead prospered, and their children grew into capable young people who knew the value of hard work and the importance of family. The cabin that had once housed just Maura and Fletcher, then Maura and Fletcher and their children, became the gathering place for a family that grew larger every year. On their 30th anniversary, all of their children and grandchildren came to the cabin for a celebration. There were now 8 grandchildren ranging from infants to teenagers, and the cabin rang with noise and laughter in a way that made Maura's heart full to bursting. Fletcher had built tables outside because they couldn't all fit indoors, and they ate under the Idaho sky with the mountains watching over them. James stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that love isn't just a feeling but a choice you make every day. Who showed me what real partnership looks like. Who built a life from nothing and proved that where you come from doesn't determine where you go. Everything good in my life started with the 2 of you. Thank you." Lucy stood next. "To Papa, who taught me I could do anything regardless of what people thought a woman should or shouldn't do. And to Mama, who showed me that strength isn't about how loud you yell but how quietly you persist. You're the best parents anyone could ask for, and the best grandparents these children could hope for." Maura was crying openly now, and Fletcher's arm around her shoulders was the only thing keeping her upright. How had she gotten so lucky? How had that terrified girl on her knees scrubbing floors ended up with this? A family that loved her, a husband who adored her, a life of purpose and meaning. "Grace," Fletcher whispered in her ear, apparently thinking the same thing. "Unearned, unexpected grace. And love," Maura added. "Don't forget love. All the grace in the world wouldn't have mattered if we hadn't chosen to love each other through every challenge, every hardship, every moment of doubt." "True enough," Fletcher agreed. "Though choosing to love you has been the easiest thing I've ever done." The celebration went long into the night, with grandchildren eventually falling asleep in piles on blankets while the adults talked around the fire. Stories were told, memories shared, laughter flowing as freely as the coffee. Maura looked around at all these faces, all these people who existed because she'd been brave enough to take Fletcher's hand 30 years ago, and felt overwhelming gratitude. As the years went on, Maura and Fletcher slowed down as people do. Fletcher's joints ached from decades of hard work in the cold, and Maura's eyes weren't as sharp as they once were. She finally had to give up teaching when she turned 60, though she still volunteered at the school, reading to the younger children and helping with lessons. Fletcher gave up the trap lines and turned them over to Thomas, who ran them efficiently while still giving Fletcher a share of the profits out of respect and love. They spent their days in quiet contentment, tending a smaller garden, taking gentle walks, reading together, receiving visits from their ever-growing family. James had become a judge, a position of respect and influence. Lucy's oldest son was learning the law from his Uncle James, while her daughter was attending teachers' college, inspired by her grandmother's example. The family they'd started had spread roots throughout Idaho territory and beyond, and every branch could trace back to that moment when Fletcher walked into the Silver Pine Inn and saw a girl who deserved better. On a crisp autumn morning in 1918, 40 years after they'd met, Maura woke to find Fletcher still asleep beside her, which was unusual. He was always the early riser, up before dawn to start the fire and put coffee on. She reached over to shake him awake, and only then realized that he was gone. Sometime in the night, peacefully in his sleep, Fletcher Pierce had passed from this world to whatever came next. The grief was crushing, even though they'd both known this day would come eventually. They'd had 40 beautiful years together, longer than many couples got, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Maura cradled Fletcher's still form and wept, not caring who heard, mourning the loss of her husband, her partner, her love. The funeral was the largest silver summit had ever seen. Fletcher had touched countless lives over the decades through his kindness, his integrity, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. But nobody mourned him as deeply as Maura, who felt like half of herself had been torn away. In the months after Fletcher's death, Maura struggled. The cabin felt empty without his presence, without his voice, without the sound of his footsteps on the porch. Lucy wanted her to move in with them, and James wanted her to come to the capital, but Maura refused. This was her home. This was where she'd built a life with Fletcher. This was where she could feel closest to him. But she was practical enough to know she couldn't maintain the homestead alone at 62. So she made arrangements with Lucy and Thomas to lease most of the land while keeping the cabin and immediate surroundings for herself. Young Daniel, Lucy's middle son, moved into the barn that Fletcher had built so long ago, converting it to a small living space so he could be nearby if Maura needed help. It was a good arrangement, giving Maura independence while ensuring she wasn't truly alone. Slowly, painfully, Maura learned to live with her grief. She found comfort in her family, in her memories, in the tangible evidence of the life she and Fletcher had built together. She took out the books they'd read together and heard Fletcher's voice in every passage. She worked in the garden and remembered his hands in the soil beside hers. She sat on the porch in the evenings and felt his presence beside her, steady and strong as it had always been. One day, going through Fletcher's things, she found a letter he'd written but never sent. It was addressed to her, and the date on it was from a month before he died. With shaking hands, she opened it and read, "My dearest Maura, if you're reading this, then I've gone on ahead and I'm sorry for that. Sorry to leave you, though I know you're strong enough to carry on without me. You've always been the strong one, even when you didn't believe it. I wanted to write down what I've thought so many times but maybe haven't said enough. Thank you. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who didn't have much to offer except love and a determination to treat you right. Thank you for building this life with me, for giving me children and grandchildren, for making me happier than I ever thought possible. Thank you for teaching me that love isn't about grand gestures but small daily choices. To listen, to support, to stand beside someone through every storm. You asked me once why I stopped at the silver pine in that day, why I didn't just keep riding. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe it was fate or grace or just good timing, but I'll never stop being grateful that I walked through that door and saw you. Because everything good in my life came from that moment. Everything I've been, everything I've accomplished, was only possible because you were beside me. I hope I proved to you that you deserved better than scrubbing floors for a man who didn't value you. I hope I showed you every single day that you were precious and important and loved beyond measure. I hope when you think of me, you smile more than you cry. And I hope you know that wherever I am, whatever comes next, I'm still loving you. Death doesn't change that. Nothing could change that. Be happy, my love. Live fully. Spend time with our children and grandchildren. Read all those books we never got around to. Take walks in our mountains. And when your time comes, whenever that is, know that I'll be waiting for you. Because this love we built, it's not the kind that ends. It's forever. All my love, always and forever, Fletcher. Maura read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, but by the third reading she was smiling too. Even in death, Fletcher was taking care of her, reminding her that she was loved, encouraging her to live fully. It was so perfectly him that it made her heart ache. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her locket, next to the pictures of her parents. The 3 people who'd loved her most in the world, all gone now but not forgotten. Never forgotten. As the years passed, Maura found a new purpose. She began writing down her story, the journey from scrub girl to teacher to wife and mother. She wrote about Fletcher and their love, about building a life in the Idaho mountains, about raising a family and creating something lasting. Her grandchildren were fascinated by the story, by the idea that their proper grandmother had once been practically enslaved by her uncle, that their grandfather had been her rescuer and champion. "But you rescued yourself too, didn't you, Grandma?" Sarah, Lucy's daughter and Maura's namesake, said one day as they worked together in the garden. Sarah was 20 now and every bit as independent as her mother. "I suppose I did," Maura acknowledged. "Your grandfather gave me the opportunity, but I had to be brave enough to take it." And that's the important part, Sarah. Opportunities come to all of us at different times, but we have to recognize them and be willing to take a risk, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. Is that why you encouraged me to go to teacher's college even though Mama wasn't sure about it? Your mother just worries because she loves you. But yes, that's exactly why. You have dreams and you have the capability to achieve them. Don't let anyone, even people who love you, convince you to settle for less than what you're capable of. Sarah hugged her grandmother tightly. Grandpa was right. You are the strongest person ever. Maura lived to see the new century mature, saw automobiles become common and the territory of Idaho become a proper state. She lived to see women get the vote, something she'd never thought would happen in her lifetime. She lived to see all 8 of her grandchildren grow to adulthood and start families of their own, blessing her with great-grandchildren she delighted in spoiling. On a warm summer day in 1928, exactly 50 years after Fletcher had walked into the Silver Pine Inn, Maura sat on her porch with Lucy beside her, watching Lucy's grandchildren play in the yard. She was 84 years old, and every one of those years showed in her face and body. But her mind was still sharp and her heart was still full. "You miss him?" Lucy asked quietly. It had been 10 years since Fletcher's passing, but the question was still relevant. "Every single day," Maura answered honestly, "but I'm grateful too. Grateful for the 40 years we had. Grateful for the family we built. Grateful that I got to experience a love like that, even if I had to eventually lose it. Better to have loved and lost, as the poet says. Do you think you'll see him again? Papa, I mean. I'd like to think so. I'd like to believe that this love was strong enough to transcend death, that wherever he is, he's waiting for me just like he promised in his letter. But even if I'm wrong, even if death is the end, it doesn't diminish what we had. The love was real. The life we built was real. That matters regardless of what comes after." Lucy squeezed her mother's hand. "You gave us such a good example to follow. Mama, Thomas and I, James and Rebecca, we modeled our marriages after yours. You showed us what real partnership looks like. Your father and I stumbled our way through like everyone else. We weren't perfect. No, but you were perfect for each other, and you worked at it. That's what we learned. Love is a verb, not just a feeling." Maura smiled. "When did you get so wise? I had good teachers." That night, Maura went to bed in the cabin that had been her home for 50 years. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the Silver Pine Inn to this mountain paradise. She thought about Fletcher and the life they'd shared. She thought about their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. all the lives that existed because one mountain man had walked into an inn and decided that a girl scrubbing floors deserved better. She fell asleep with a smile on her face and didn't wake up. Like Fletcher before her, she passed peacefully in her sleep, her long life finally complete. The funeral was even larger than Fletcher's had been. Maura had touched generations of lives through her teaching, her kindness, her example. But it was her family who mourned her most deeply. James and Lucy, now elderly themselves, wept for the mother who'd given them such a strong foundation. The grandchildren shared stories of her wisdom and love. The great-grandchildren, some of whom barely remembered her, were told they came from a line of strong, capable people who knew how to love well. They buried Maura next to Fletcher on a hill overlooking the cabin, with a view of the Idaho mountains stretching into forever. The headstone was simple. Fletcher Pierce, 1850–1918, beloved husband, father, grandfather. Maura Pierce, 1844–1928, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and beneath both names a single line. They proved love was enough, because it was. Despite all the obstacles they'd faced, despite their difficult pasts, despite the hardships inherent in frontier life, love had been enough. Not love alone, because they'd needed courage and determination, and hard work too. But love had been the foundation everything else was built on. Love had given them reason to keep going when times were hard. Love had made the good times sweeter. Love had created a family, a legacy, a story worth telling. Years later, when great-great-grandchildren asked about the couple buried on the hill, they were told the story. About a mountain man and a scrub girl who found each other against all odds. About how he told her she deserved better, and then spent 40 years proving it. About how she showed him what it meant to be truly loved and valued. About how together they built something lasting in the Idaho wilderness, something that echoed through generations. The cabin still stands, maintained by the family as a reminder of where they came from. Inside, you can still see the shelves Fletcher built to hold books, the table where they ate meals together, the fireplace where they read on winter evenings, the bed where they loved each other and eventually died peacefully in their sleep. And if you stand on the porch at sunset, looking out at the mountains turning gold and purple in the fading light, you can almost see them. A tall, broad-shouldered man with long hair and bright blue eyes. A woman who was stronger than she ever gave herself credit for, with dark eyes that held both sadness and hope. Standing together, his arm around her shoulders, her hand over his heart, looking at the life they built with satisfaction and joy. Some love stories end when the lovers die. But the best ones, the ones that matter, continue on in the lives they touched and the legacy they left behind. Fletcher and Maura Pierce's love story was one of those. It lived on in their descendants, in the cabin on the mountain, in the lessons they taught about courage and determination, and choosing love every single day. She was the innkeeper's niece who scrubbed floors. He was the mountain man who said she deserved better. And together, for 50 beautiful years, they proved it.